So in the past, I've done video essays that are responses, more or less, to other articles or videos that I've read or watched. I've decided that from here on out, I want to separate those going forward. So this video is not a video essay. It's in a similar vein, but can't exactly say it's the same thing. This is a response to an article I read in Jacobin recently by Branko Marcetic, I hope I'm pronouncing that name right, called Why We Need a Nationwide Vaccine Mandate. And I gotta be honest with y'all. For as left-leaning as I am politically, as you probably have guessed by now, I've always been hesitant on the issue of vaccine mandates because the civil libertarian in me has been saying, no, we shouldn't mandate them. But with COVID now, that really, my principles on that issue, like my principled stance, I suppose, if you want to call it that, on this issue has been put to the test as we are seeing unvaccinated people essentially just, for lack of a better term, ruin everything. So my stance on that issue hasn't really been put to the test lately. But I read this article recently, and it makes some good points, and I want to go over it, and I want to give my response. We'll get into the 3 points the article makes in a minute, but I want to point out this line right here. How should the left, or if anyone wanting to balance efforts to prevent the mass death of working people with a care for civil liberties, feel about such a measure? And is it the unprecedented authoritarian power grab that some have attempted to paint it as? Yeah, I think that is definitely a question worth asking. Again, how do you balance your support for civil liberties and individual freedom with maintaining the public good? And I think that's what these points in this article are going to address. 1. Vaccine mandates are far from unprecedented in the United States. However you might feel about the idea of vaccine mandates, they're not some scary new creation of our quasi-anti-authoritarian age. Most people are familiar with them in the most common form they are already taken in the modern America. Vaccination requirements for children before they can enter schools, some version of which every single state in the country has on the books. Nearly half of all states imposed them by the start of the 20th century to deal with the scourge of smallpox, with requirements expanding and spreading throughout the country after the 1960s, thanks in part to the development of a measles vaccine in 1963. Yeah, and this is fair, and I've always supported vaccine mandates for children, especially school children. Limited mandates for adults have also a similarly long history. The military has required all soldiers to get vaccinated for a variety of diseases since at least as far back as the Revolutionary War, when George Washington decided that inoculating every single recruit against smallpox was the only way he'd be able to defeat the British. And likewise, we could use the same argument now that getting inoculated, getting vaccinated in this case, is the only way we're ever going to defeat this virus. And I use defeat in quotation marks because, it's possible it never goes away and eventually we just learn to live with it. But at the very least, if we're all vaccinated against it, or if the majority of us are vaccinated against it, we could resume life as was and, again, just learn to live with it. And as the article continues on, there are numerous examples of states and cities compelling all of their residents to get shots without exception. Massachusetts led the way, making smallpox vaccination compulsory to attend public school in 1855. The Brooklyn and New York health departments embarked upon a policy of de facto compulsory vaccination to deal with outbreaks in 1893 to 94, I can't read, and 1901 to 1902. By the latter year, Connecticut, Delaware, Georgia, and Kentucky all had general compulsory vaccination statutes. Even in the town of Muncie, Indiana, put in place a citywide mandatory vaccinations in response to an 1893 outbreak. So we're already seeing examples of vaccine mandates in response to other epidemics throughout history. And this really does kind of snap me out of my no mandatory vaccines position that I've had for a while. The fraught battles at the time between authorities and anti-vaccinationists culminated in the Supreme Court's well-known 1905 Jacobin v. Massachusetts decision, which upheld, by a 7-2 vote, states' government's right to enact mandatory vaccination. In his opinion for the majority, Justice John Marshall Harlan pointed to the social compact to argue that there are manifold restraints to which every person is necessarily subject for the common good. Crucially, he created a health-based exemption for vaccine requirements that hadn't existed in Massachusetts law, and he also left enough leeway for individual liberty that the decision would be later used to establish a right to privacy for married couples and strike down the contraception bans. So this is important because the social construct that he's talking about is referring to the idea that we have a responsibility to look out for each other and to show solidarity with one another. And this time, one of the easiest ways to do that is to get vaccinated. Because that is, in the end, if what is going to, at least in part, help reduce the number of hospitalizations and deaths due to COVID. While getting vaccinated is not going to prevent you from getting COVID full stop, it is going to prevent you almost entirely from being hospitalized or from dying from it. And that is a social contract. It's an unspoken and unwritten social contract that we have as Americans, because you may value your freedom of choice as to whether or not to get vaccinated, but really you also have to consider the freedom of others to not be hospitalized and to not die, and also to resume their pre-2020 lives. Number 2, mandates pale in comparison to many invasive measures already forced on and accepted by Americans in the name of security. It basically starts off by pointing out and sympathizing with the concerns that civil libertarians have about vaccine mandates, including their opposition to drug testing of welfare recipients. But it also talks about how absolutism doesn't have to be the answer. For instance, it points out how tech state censorships and authoritarian state institutions pose a threat to freedom of speech online. But a lot of people on the left also support strict limits on money in politics, which the Supreme Court has ruled is speech protection. Now, me personally, I think that Supreme Court ruling is complete BS, because the idea that money in politics is not even the appearance of corruption, let alone corruption, is incredibly stupid and in and of itself corrupt. But moving on. Similarly, it's possible to oppose mandatory drug testing and non-consensual medical experience while seeing vaccine mandates as a pragmatic solution to an exceptional and life-threatening crisis. When just under 3,000 people died in the September 11th attacks, the U.S. government instituted a variety of radically invasive measures that are still in place today. Unlike terrorism, which, not counting the wildly exceptional event that caused basic security failures on September 11th, led to an average of only 36 Americans' deaths worldwide between 1995 and 2016. The coronavirus pandemic has been incredibly deadly, killing more than 600,000 people within U.S. borders after only a year or 5 months. In fact, from December 2020 to early February of this year, the pandemic in the United States was inflicting well over the 9/11 death toll every day. So this is clear right here that the death count from COVID is obviously way worse than that of 9/11, which, even on a day-to-day basis at some points, which nobody would deny, well, unless you're a COVID truther, in which case, get the hell off this channel, you're not welcome here. But at the same time, understanding this really does help to put things in perspective and make them realize that those measures that we put into place, like the Patriot Act and the surveillance state, and like the expanded security and police state, really did way more harm than good, when we know for a fact how vaccines are effective and they can help end the pandemic. So it really does make things sound a lot more reasonable when you look at it in that perspective. Fears of a slippery slope that mandating vaccinations will lead us down a road that ends up somewhere in the vicinity of fascism are also understandable. But looking at the history of totalitarian regimes, it wasn't mandatory immunization programs that gave them tyrannical power over their people. Rather, it was things like secret police forces, widespread government surveillance, and harsh punishment of criticism and dissent, the architecture for which has already been set up to combat terrorism, and which has never stopped growing. Yeah, and all that stuff is currently present in the United States. But honestly, when you put it in that sense, vaccine mandates are pretty tame in comparison. And finally, number 3, any mandate needs to be carefully and thoughtfully designed. As this section points out, the Jacobin decision was eventually used to justify eugenics and forced sterilization of others. and the mandatory vaccination programs were generally used to crack down on poor communities and communities of color. This really right here has been my general fear with vaccine mandates up until this point, which is how would they be enforced? Like, I don't want, like, even if you're an anti-vaxxer, and I have honestly limited sympathy for you, I don't want the police to barge down and literally stick a needle in your arm against your will. I don't want them to do that to you. And I admit, I was being pretty hyperbolic when I was thinking that, but still, like, the question remained, how would they be enforced? But this section right here, I think, really lays it out well. Luckily, localities in New York City have shown that there are better ways to carry out a mandate that don't involve intimidating people with police power, focusing instead on restricting access to certain amenities, including restaurants, cinemas, and gyms, to only those who can prove that they've been inoculated. Yeah, and this makes perfect sense, you know? Basically tell people, hey, do you want to go to the bar? You can't unless you're vaccinated. I think that will definitely have an impact on people. Like for me, I'm going back to school tomorrow, and they're saying you got to get vaccinated if you want to go back. That's definitely going to encourage a lot of people. But then again, it's a liberal arts school in New England, so maybe that's not the best example because people going there are already likely to get vaccinated anyway, but you get the point. And the article ends by talking about a reluctant trade-off, saying, quote, at the end of the day, while a vaccine mandate is an important strategy, it should only be used as one of many to bring up the vaccination percentage as high as possible. The reasons people are still unvaccinated are complicated, like a lack of accessibility, a fear of surprise billing, and a lack of trust in the government. And really, these concerns are not unfounded. I mean, really, many people have already called this vaccine, like this free vaccine for everybody, a trial run for Medicare for all. Because you can just show up, you don't even need an insurance card, get shot in your arm, that is, and leave, and don't gotta pay a dime. All you gotta do is fill out a form, get the shot, go home. Simple as that. But you know, for many people who have received surprise medical billing, and people who are forced into medical bankruptcy, and for people who have been ripped off by Big Pharma in the past, these concerns are not unfounded. Now, ultimately, while I disagree with these concerns, again, I think people who have these concerns have them in good faith because of their experiences. And really, you can blame the government in part for setting up such a rapacious for-profit system that really puts companies' profits first. Because it's that system that has led people to be distrustful of this process. Even when we know it's going to benefit them, they are still completely not trustworthy of it because they've been lied to before and they've been ripped off before. And this is why, really, a vaccine mandate is just the first step. But I have officially changed my position, and I do support a vaccine mandate for COVID-19. And this is a good article. I should have said this earlier in the video, but I'll link to it below if you want to check it out. And I think it can really help a lot of people out who are on the fence about this issue. You know, people who really want to balance their civil libertarian streak with the protecting the public good. I think that's what it did for me. I know there may be some disagreements with me on this. That's totally fine. I'm open for a discussion on this. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. And just a quick heads up, I know I haven't been uploading a lot lately, and that's because, well, I've been working a lot. I've been working this summer, and over the last couple weeks I've been working way longer than I normally do. And also, I'm moving into my college dorm tomorrow. And again, getting prepared for that has kind of slowed me down a little bit. But again, I'm moving in tomorrow, and once that happens, I should be able to get back into the swing of things, get back to making videos. In addition, of course, to working on my college class. That will be one of my main projects and one of my main focuses. So, thank you guys for watching, and if you want to check out my last video, you can check that out right over here. Be sure to like, subscribe, do all that good jazz if you like what you see here. And in the meantime, I'm Alex Kawa, and I'm out. Peace out, comrades.